Second part of week 2 involves tissues, particularly those tissues associated with the skin, the integumentary system, and the mucous membranes, and serous membranes. Mucous membranes line the inside of your gut cavity, starting with your mouth and nose, and the serous membranes surround the organs inside of your gut cavity. And they move against each other, so they're somewhat glandular and secrete mucus so that they can slide across each other freely without soreness. I'm going to let Tammy Moore explain part of this lecture to you. One of the things that is really important relative to the function of the integumentary system is that it's the first line of defense against invading organisms.
Another lymphatic system structure is the thymus gland. Like the tonsils, the thymus gland changes as a person matures. When a person is young, the thymus gland is large in proportion to the body size. During this stage of life, it is mostly lymphatic tissue. After puberty, it decreases in size and becomes mostly fibrous and fatty tissue. What does the thymus gland do? Like many things in the human body, the scientific community is still rather puzzled by the thymus gland. We know that while a person is young, immature lymphocytes known as T lymphocytes leave the bone marrow. Remember, blood cells are made in the bone marrow, and they travel to the thymus. Through a remarkable maturation process, sometimes referred to as thymic education, T lymphocytes that are beneficial to the immune system are spared, while T lymphocytes that might evoke a detrimental immunological response are eliminated. For example, if you have type A blood, T lymphocytes which attack the A antigen are destroyed. However, T lymphocytes which attack the B antigen are allowed to mature and enter the bloodstream.
Your body is supposed to learn what proteins or what antigens well, not antigens, what items in the environment are safe. And sometimes it learns the wrong thing, and you have these allergic responses to things that don't really hurt you. And they shouldn't be causing an allergy. An allergy is a mistake, but it does happen, and we have to deal with it. Okay? So now Tammy's going to talk about the first line of defense, your skin, and the inflammatory response, the second line of defense.
Though not an organism, they're also toxins. These are also harmful to the body, and the immune system has the majority of pathogens do get stopped at this first line of defense. The skin is part of the integumentary system. The keratin in skin cells make skin waterproof, and it allows the skin to act as a barrier, keeping foreign invaders out of the body. Sweat washes the surface of the skin. It also helps lower the pH of the skin. Those low pH environments inhibit the growth and activity of many pathogens. The sebaceous glands secrete oil, which contains antibacterial substances. Some epithelial tissues, such as that found in the sinuses, trachea, and cervix, secrete mucus. This mucus traps and catches microorganisms so that they cannot go anywhere. Once the pathogens are trapped in the mucus, the body needs to get rid of them. That is accomplished by cilia on certain cells that line the mucus-producing epithelium. These cells beat their cilia, moving mucus toward the mouth or nose. We can then blow our nose, cough, or swallow the mucus so as to get rid of it. The cervical mucus is a nonspecific defense against infection. But in addition, cervical mucus contains antibodies, which are part of the acquired immune system. Thus, cervical mucus is a mixture of nonspecific and specific defense. Urine is also a very important first line of nonspecific immunity. Any opening to the outside is a potential place for infection. Urine washes out the tract that leads to the outside. It helps fight off any organisms attempting to enter the body that way. The acid in the gastric juice kills most pathogens. Thus, swallowing our own mucus helps us kill pathogens that are stuck in the mucus. If we eat food that contains bacteria, as most food does, the gastric juice in our stomach kills those bacteria before they can do any damage. Tears contain an enzyme called lysozyme. This enzyme breaks down the cell walls of many bacteria. The term lyse means to break, so lysosome is an enzyme that breaks cell walls. Lysozyme is the main reason that we rarely get eye infections. The tears bathe the eye in lysozyme, killing bacteria which try to infect it. However, sometimes even the lysozyme in tears is not enough to kill the bacteria invading the eyes. When that happens, the eye gets infected. The most common bacterial infection of the eye is known as pink eye. There is one more first line of innate immunity: symbiotic organisms. There are a host of symbiotic organisms which live throughout the body. Bacteria in our intestines, for example, produce vitamin K, and in return we provide food and a place for them to live. Those symbiotic bacteria flourish in our intestines, and their population can actually squeeze out populations of pathogenic bacteria and fungi which might get past the stomach. In addition, symbiotic bacteria and fungi that live on our skin and consume our sweat produce lactic acid, which fights off both pathogenic bacteria and fungi.
Okay, so now Tammy's going to talk about the inflammatory response. But she's going to start with the complement system, which involves chemicals that are in your blood that help to trigger the inflammatory response.
Complements are involved in fighting foreign cells, which are generally bacteria. The complement system is made up of 20 plasma proteins made by the liver, which is then released into the bloodstream. Like blood coagulation factors, these proteins stay inactive in the blood serum until something activates them. The foreign invader itself can activate the protein, or the presence of antibodies bound to antigens can do the activation. Either way, this happens only when foreign cells are present. They can lyse bacteria. The complement proteins combine to form a hole in the plasma membrane of foreign cells, particularly bacteria. This causes its components to leak out, killing the foreign cell. Not only can the complement proteins lyse bacteria, but they can also attract phagocytotic cells. The phagocytotic cells can then destroy the bacteria by eating them. These proteins can help promote inflammation. You might think inflammation is bad, but it can be a very good thing. Inflammation is a sign that there's a war going on between your body's defenses and an invader. This signal can rally the troops, bringing more disease-fighting mechanisms to bear. When the body's cells are under attack, they send out chemical signals that are picked up by the basophils, which are attracted to those signals. The basophils in turn release a variety of chemicals: leukotriene, prostaglandin, heparin, and histamine. Heparin inhibits blood clotting, allowing the wound to wash out any foreign matter that may have been introduced during the injury. Histamine triggers inflammation or vasodilation. Vasodilation is when the vessels dilate, making them larger. This brings in additional blood flow to the area so that the area has additional resources for fighting any infection. In addition, the dilation makes it easier for white blood cells to squeeze between the vessel cells in order to enter into the tissue that's damaged and infected. This process is called diapedesis. If the infection stays contained to the one location, it's called a local inflammation. But if that infection escapes into the bloodstream and spreads throughout the body, it triggers a systemic inflammation. There are many types of white blood cells that will become active in fighting an infection. The basophil is merely the first type. We'll learn more about the other types in a moment. Any bacterium or a virus can potentially be attacked by white blood cells, so they're non-specific. White blood cells generally have about a 12-hour lifespan, and they're produced in the bone marrow. The neutrophils and monocytes are phagocytes. That means they can eat other cells. Neutrophils are typically the first of the two phagocytotic white cells to respond. They are not very large, and they can only consume about 20 bacteria before they reach the end of their lifespan. They can consume fungi and some viruses as well. They hang out in the liver, spleen, and lungs until needed. The next to respond are the monocytes. These are the larger phagocytotic white blood cells, the big eaters. Once they enter the tissues, they are called macrophages. These big boys can consume about 100 bacteria in their lifespan. They also tackle the really large pathogens, such as parasites. These white blood cells will hang out in the tissues, near vessel walls, and around the lymphatic vessels. Eosinophils are also part of our innate immune response. These cells reduce inflammation. Why would the body have one type of cell that promotes inflammation and another type that reduces it? Well, inflammation can be a good thing, but too much inflammation can be very bad. Thus, inflammation must stay under control. Eosinophils contain enzymes that tend to break down inflammatory agents, keeping inflammation under control.
Let's take a look at wound healing. Okay, what happens when you heal a wound? Now this is a 4-minute video. Let's take a quick look at it. It's a pretty good one, and I'll expand this.
Injury. Epinephrine, a chemical that constricts peripheral blood vessels, is released in an attempt to minimize bleeding into the soft tissues. The key cell responsible for this function is the platelet, which causes the body to form a clot to prevent further bleeding. There is an increased aggregation of platelets to enable the wounded vessel to complete the clotting process. Platelets also release key cytokines, such as platelet-derived growth factor, that call in cells to participate in later phases of healing. The objective of the hemostasis phase of wound healing is to control bleeding. Following hemostasis, the inflammatory phase begins. The local signs and symptoms that occur during the inflammatory phase are swelling, increased fluid, perfusion of blood, redness, release of epinephrine, histamine, heat, histamine response, and pain. The inflammatory phase is characterized by a host of cells, leukocytes and macrophages, infiltrating the wound sites. Bleeding is controlled by hemostasis. Any bacteria that is present is destroyed by leukocytes, particularly the polymorphonuclear neutrophils. About 4 days after the injury, macrophages work to destroy bacteria, cleansing the wound of cellular debris. Macrophages replace the leukocytes and produce a host of cytokines and growth factors. These act as chemoattractants to other cells needed for tissue repair. Macrophages also convert macromolecules into the amino acids and sugars necessary for wound healing.
I'm going to stop it there just for a moment to mention that you see this pocket, which is the wound, although it's only a diagram, but it's also the place where the pus builds up that you will see, the infection. And that actually is the dead bodies of the white cells that Tammy Moore mentioned only last for so many hours. They can eat so many bacteria and then they die. And so when you're fighting an infection at a localized wound, you will get that pus buildup, which is the dead bodies of your white cells, basically, that have been fighting the infection.
It is thought that the macrophage also attracts contractual cells to the wound to encourage wound contraction. Vasodilation with resultant edema, warmth, and rubor are the result of factors secreted from the macrophage and other leukocytes present at the wound site in response to the inflammatory process. The objectives of the inflammatory phase of wound healing are to clean debris and bacteria and prevent infection. Scar tissue formation is characterized by 3 distinct phases. Granulation. As the wound site fills with granulation tissue, its margins contract or pull together, decreasing the size of the wound. The extent of contraction is dependent upon the mobility of the surrounding tissue. During the epithelialization, the final step of this phase, cells migrate from the wound margins, divide, and ultimately touch one another, sealing the wound. The collagen fibers reorganize, remodel, and mature, gaining tensile strength. Collagen fibers, proteoglycans, and fibronectin are rearranged and redistributed. The scar becomes less cellular and gains tensile strength. Collagen synthesis begins with the fibroblast, which secretes procollagen. Growth of the procollagen fibers is a complicated process. Macrophage and platelets are key growth factors in the development of procollagen. Procollagen fibers mature into collagen fibril. The fibrils then link together into a very strong rope-like collagen fiber.
So there you have a pretty good set of information relative to the function of the integumentary system,